Imagine being alone, starving and desperate, with your children's lives hanging by a thread. A widow pleads for anyone to save them. And then a giant Apache appears, promising to take them all and protect them. What happens next will change everything you thought about courage, trust and survival. Stay with us till the end of this story, and don't forget to subscribe, share and comment your thoughts below. Let's dive into this incredible journey of hope, fear and unexpected heroes. Let's get started. The sun had barely risen over the endless plains when a frail figure appeared on the horizon, stumbling through the dry, cracked earth. A widow, her body weakened by hunger and despair, clutched the hands of her 3 children, dragging them forward as if sheer will could keep them alive. Dust clung to her tattered dress, and her hair, matted and unwashed, whipped in the cold morning wind. Her eyes, hollow and haunted, scanned the barren land, searching for a miracle that seemed almost impossible in a world so unforgiving and cruel. She sank to her knees by a dried-up creek, the children huddling close to her side. Their stomachs grumbled in protest, a cruel reminder that there was nothing left to eat. She pressed a shaking hand to her chest, trying to quiet her own hunger as much as theirs, her mind racing for a solution she did not have. The wind carried her whispered plea across the plains, "Take my children, save them, please." The words were raw, desperate, a fragile thread of hope tossed into the vast emptiness of the wilderness. From the distant tree line, a figure emerged, moving with a deliberate, powerful grace that immediately drew the widow's attention. He was a giant, tall and broad, with the quiet intensity of someone who had survived more than a lifetime of hardship. His skin was weathered by sun and wind, and his eyes, dark and piercing, reflected both wisdom and an unshakable strength. He paused for a moment, observing the woman and her children with careful consideration, and then began walking toward them, his steps purposeful but calm. Children instinctively shrank behind their mother, their tiny bodies pressed to her as if her presence alone could shield them. The widow rose unsteadily, trying to protect them, though her strength was nearly gone. Fear and exhaustion etched every line of her face, and she expected anger or violence from the towering man, for she had heard too many tales of Apache in the region. But as he stopped a few feet away, his voice, low and steady, shattered her expectation. "Why do you cry, mother?" he asked. She blinked, startled by the calm authority in his tone. Her lips trembled, and for a moment no words came. Finally she whispered, I have nothing, no food, no shelter. My children will starve and I cannot help them." Her voice cracked as tears fell freely, streaking the dirt on her cheeks. The giant's gaze softened, and he knelt slowly, lowering himself to their level, not with menace, but with understanding. "And yet you offer them to me?" he asked gently. She nodded, choking back another sob, her body shivering from both cold and fear. "Yes, take them. Save them, I cannot," she faltered, unable to continue, hiding her face in her hands. "I cannot watch them die." The giant remained silent, and for a moment the wind carried only the sound of their ragged breathing and the faint rustling of the plains. Then he spoke, his deep voice carrying a strange comfort. "And you, what of yourself?" The widow's voice was barely a whisper. I will not survive much longer. I am too weak to care for them or myself, but if you save them, some part of me will live." His expression did not harden, nor did he wrinkle. Instead, he straightened, and his eyes met hers with a quiet determination that startled her. "I will take you too," he said simply. The words were not a threat but a promise, protection, sustenance, and safety. Her lips trembled. You would take all of us?" she asked, disbelief mingled with hope. "Even me, even you," he replied. "You will not face this world alone, you will not starve, you will have someone to guard you." Relief washed over her like a sudden rain, and she fell to her knees, not in fear but in gratitude. One by one, the children reached out hesitantly, and his massive hands enveloped theirs in warmth and reassurance. He led them across the plains with slow, deliberate steps, always keeping their safety in mind. The children, once frail and trembling, began to feel a strange security in his presence, their tiny hands never leaving his. The widow struggled to keep pace, exhaustion threatening to collapse her entirely, but he slowed, matching their pace to her frail strength. "We must find water first," he said, steady and firm. "Then food, you will eat. Your children will eat. You will survive." They came to a narrow creek, its waters sparkling in the early sunlight. The children ran ahead, their laughter a strange, joyous sound that startled the widow, who had not heard such carefree noise in weeks. She knelt at the water's edge, drinking greedily, feeling life return to her parched body. The giant Apache watched silently, almost reverently, giving them space to recover. The children splashed and played, their hunger momentarily forgotten, and for the first time she allowed herself a flicker of hope. After quenching their thirst, he led them to a hidden grove, surrounded by dense oaks and shielded by the natural curve of the land. Here food awaited, wild fruits, roots, and small game he had hunted earlier. The children's eyes lit up at the sight, and they dove in without hesitation, their laughter mingling with the sounds of the forest. The widow, watching them eat, felt tears threaten again, this time from relief instead of despair. Her children were safe, fed, and under the protection of someone stronger and wiser than anyone she had ever known. That night, sitting by a fire built by the giant's careful hands, the widow found herself staring into the flames, trying to comprehend what had happened. "Why help us?" she asked softly, her voice trembling with wonder. "We have nothing, we offer nothing." He looked at her calmly, shadows flickering across his broad features. "Because life is precious," he said, "because no one should suffer when it can be prevented. You trusted me with your children. That trust is worth more than any gift." Over the following days, the widow learned from him how to survive in the wild, how to recognize edible plants, how to track game, and how to protect herself and her children. He moved with ease across the terrain, teaching her not just to endure but to thrive. The children grew stronger each day, their laughter returning, their eyes brightening with the vigor of new hope. The giant's lessons were not only practical but filled with wisdom, stories of honor, respect, and the bonds that make life worth living. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky with fiery reds, the widow approached him. "I do not know how to thank you," she said, her voice shaking. "You have saved us, not just our lives, but our hearts." He shook his head slowly, his gaze steady. "You need not thank me," he said. "Your endurance, your refusal to give up, that is reward enough. You have survived, and that is why you are here. That is why your children are here." The children played nearby, their small hands clutching bits of wild fruit, their laughter echoing through the grove. The widow watched them and realized that their lives had changed forever. They were no longer victims of hunger and despair, no longer drifting aimlessly across the unforgiving plains. They had found protection, guidance, and hope in the unlikeliest of figures, a giant of a man whose strength was rivaled only by the kindness in his heart. Days turned into weeks, and the widow and her children began to adapt to the rhythm of the land under the Apache's careful guidance. Each morning, they woke to the sound of birdsong and the gentle rustle of leaves, a stark contrast to the harsh silence and emptiness that had marked their lives before. The giant taught them not only how to survive, but how to read the land, the hidden signs of animals, the patterns of the wind, the trails that led to water and shelter. Slowly, fear began to fade, replaced by a cautious hope that perhaps life could be more than endless struggle. The children grew stronger, their faces filling out as nourishment returned to their bodies. Laughter became a constant sound, once a foreign concept to them. They ran through the grove, chasing each other and discovering the small wonders hidden in the wild. Their mother, though still weary, found strength in watching their joy return. The giant never left their side, his presence a quiet assurance that nothing would harm them. At night, he would sit by the fire, teaching the widow lessons in hunting, tracking, and gathering, and telling stories of his people, weaving lessons of courage and honor into each tale. One evening, as a pale moon rose over the grove, the widow finally spoke of the life she had left behind. "I had nothing to offer my children," she said softly, "and yet you have given them everything. You saved us when the world had abandoned us." He looked at her, his eyes reflecting the firelight and something deeper, something ancient. "The world may abandon many," he said, "but not everyone. We protect those we can. You trusted me with your children, and I honor that trust. That is all that matters." The widow could not help but feel a deep, unexplainable connection to this man. He was fierce yet gentle, strong yet compassionate. In the quiet moments, she realized she had begun to rely not only on his protection, but on his presence itself, the certainty that he would not let harm come to them. And in turn, he had begun to see her courage, her resilience, and the quiet determination that had kept her alive when all else had failed. One afternoon, as they were foraging near the edge of the grove, the widow stumbled upon tracks in the dirt, signs of wild animals that had been nearby. The giant knelt beside her, showing her how to read each print, how to follow it without startling the creature, and how to use it to provide food. The children watched with wide eyes, absorbing every word. For the first time, the widow felt capable, empowered even, knowing she could provide for her family. The Apache's lessons were becoming a part of her, giving her skills she never dreamed she could learn. Winter approached, and the cold winds swept across the plains. The widow worried about how they would survive the harsh months, but the Apache had already prepared. He had guided them to a natural hollow in the grove, sheltered by trees and rock formations, where they could stay warm. He showed them how to collect firewood efficiently, how to insulate themselves with leaves and animal hides, and how to find food even when the snow covered the ground. Each challenge they faced became an opportunity to grow stronger, to work together as a family with the giant at the center of their newfound security. One night as the fire crackled and the children slept, the widow asked the question that had been on her mind since their first meeting. "Why did you choose us?" she asked, her voice barely more than a whisper. "There are many in need, why us?" He looked into the flames for a long moment before replying. "Because sometimes those who seem weakest carry the greatest strength in their hearts. You had given up nothing, yet you offered everything, your trust, your children, your hope. That is why I chose you." The widow understood then that survival was not only about food or water or shelter. It was about the choices people made, the courage to continue despite despair, and the trust that could bind strangers together into something stronger than fear. The Apache had not only saved them from death, but he had restored their faith in life itself. Spring arrived, and with it, renewal. The children ran through the grove, their laughter carrying farther than the winds of winter ever could. The widow tended a small patch of cultivated roots and vegetables, taught by the Apache, and for the first time felt the satisfaction of creating something sustainable. The giant watched with pride as the family he had rescued flourished, knowing that their survival was no longer fragile, but rooted in their own growing strength and knowledge. One day, while teaching the children how to track small animals, the widow noticed the gentle way the Apache interacted with them. His patience was limitless, his lessons precise yet kind. The children, who had once clung to her in fear, now ran alongside him, mimicking his movements, learning the ways of the land through his guidance. The widow felt a wave of gratitude that words could not capture. They had been given a second chance, and it was entirely because of this man who had stepped into their lives without hesitation, without expectation, only the desire to help. Eventually, it became clear that this new life was more than survival, it was a family. The widow and her children had found safety, nourishment, and education, but they had also found love, trust, and belonging. The Apache, in turn, found something unexpected. The satisfaction of knowing his actions had created a ripple of life and hope in a world so often marked by loss and suffering. He was no longer a solitary figure wandering the plains. He had a purpose beyond survival, a reason to care, to nurture, and to protect. As the sun set on a golden horizon, the widow sat by the fire with her children, watching the Apache in the distance as he prepared food and repaired a shelter. She felt a profound sense of peace, a certainty that they would never again face the terror of the world alone. In his presence, they had learned resilience, courage, and the value of trust. The giant Apache, who had entered their lives like a force of nature, had transformed their despair into hope, their weakness into strength, and their fear into love. Their story became one of quiet legend, carried in whispers across the plains. Those who had once spoken of danger and fear now spoke of courage, of a giant protector who had chosen to save a widow and her children against all odds. And though the world remained harsh and unforgiving, the widow knew that as long as they had each other and the Apache by their side, they could face anything. Hunger, cold, fear, and despair were no longer the masters of their lives. Instead, hope, courage, and the bond they shared with this extraordinary man defined their days. In the end, it was not just about survival, it was about the human spirit, the ability to trust and to give, even in the darkest of moments. The widow and her children had been saved, not only from death, but from despair, and they had learned that sometimes the most unexpected strangers could become the most vital guardians of life. And as they sat together under the vast sky, watching the last light fade from the horizon, the widow knew one thing with absolute certainty. Their lives had been forever changed by the giant Apache who had chosen to take them, all of them, and protect them as his own.